The horrific Vietnam War was for the most part a war of traps and obstacles, which were used by the enemy with incredible efficiency. But in spite of the reality that, as a rule, the traps set by the Viet Cong injured or killed one, and less often several soldiers, they had a tremendous psychological impact. Much later, after the war, both soldiers and officers remembered many things in great detail. When the ground units made their path through the trackless jungle, everyone had to look carefully not only under their feet, but also around and even up, because loss of one's life could appear at any moment and from any place. Until today, the military believes that the minefields and traps used by the Viet Cong army are considered one of the most rational and mortal. Secret Chronicles here. Keep watching this episode where we will tell you about the scariest and deadly traps used in Vietnam. Punji sticks traps. One of the most common and lethal, while its preparation was not difficult. In fact, the trap was a piece of wood with stakes attached to it. The stakes were smeared with rotten meat. Camouflaged in the grass, the trap was invisible, so the attacker immediately received several penetrating wounds to the foot. And in addition, because of the lubricated stakes, the wounded man was threatened with gangrene or blood poisoning. There existed also a modernized version of this trap, the so-called Big Punji. It was just a heavily enlarged version, where the stakes were tall enough to cause injury all the way to the thigh and groin area. At the same time, lubricating stakes with cadaveric poison or feces often did not give the wounded any chance of recovery and, accordingly, life. There was yet another version of the Big Punji, which was considered the deadliest and the most dreadful. According to the principle of operation, it was an analog of a certain mousetrap for several mice. A lid was fixed between the trees, which was masked by grass and earth. When the soldiers tapped on the lid, it stepped aside, and the unfortunate fell into a hole where stakes were densely studded. At the same time, the lid returned to its original position afterwards, waiting for a new victim. Another alternative is called the bear trap. There were two pits, the upper one of the larger diameter, the lower pit of a smaller one. In a larger pit, two boards with spikes were installed. When the leg failed, it went into the lower pit, and the boards closed, piercing the leg with stakes. The second name given to this trap was Vietnamese souvenir. The fact is that the pin that pierced the leg, like the collapsed boards, could only be withdrawn in the hospital. After the surgery, the wounded man was given pin as a souvenir, so the pin turned into a terrible military souvenir. Actually, though, the names of the souvenirs among the soldiers received almost all the traps that, when hit, damaged the limbs. For example, one of the improved versions was the so-called crow's foot, where 4 hooks were placed instead of stakes. Again, it was possible to extract only in the hospital, and the wounded received his terrible souvenir. The next one is the bamboo trap. It is also quite a creepy tool that could be installed either in the village or in the jungle. There were 2 types of such a trap. The first was placed in the doorway. As soon as the soldier opened the door, a log studded with stakes flew out to meet him. As a rule, the trap was placed so that the log flew out at head level. At best, this led to severe injury. At worst, to immediate death. Well, the option in the jungle was almost the same, but in order for the trap to be activated, the Vietnamese put a tripwire. Sometimes the log was replaced with a semblance of a ball, and instead of metal stakes, pointed shoots of bamboo were fixed, which was more than sufficient in strength to inflict severe injuries. The next on the list is whip trap. This, in essence, was just a shoot of young bamboo, which was pulled back, attached, fixing several pointed stakes at the end. Again, stretching was used for activation. As soon as the soldier kicked into the tripwire, he was hit in the face, sometimes in the abdomen or knees, with the end of the escape with stakes. Relatively often, instead of stakes, either a snake or a poisonous insect could be attached to the end of the bamboo. Meeting with such creatures also obviously did not bring anything good. The bucket. The trap was basically a bucket with stakes or fish hooks densely stuck inside. The bucket was buried in the ground, and when the soldier's leg failed, it was impossible to remove the leg. The person had to dig up the bucket itself and then evacuate the wounded with it. Naturally, this greatly slowed down the progress in military missions. Locked-up trap. Yet another invention of the Vietnamese. It consisted of 2 wooden plates connected by an elastic band. traditionally studded with stakes and placed above a small pit. Thin bamboo sticks were additionally installed between the boards. As soon as a soldier stumbled upon them and broke them, the boards collapsed, as a rule, at the level of the stomach. Often stakes were additionally installed in the pit, so the victim was seriously wounded in the stomach and leg at the same time. Snake panel. As a common practice during the war, such traps were placed in swamps, puddles, or shallow ponds. The trap was a board, one end of which was studded with stakes, and on the other side there was a pressure plate. As soon as the soldier advanced, with a terrible whistle he was beaten in the face or chest by a fixed board. The ingenuity was such that the probability of surviving after this trap was almost zero. An additional modification because of which this trap got its name was the usage of snakes. They were fixed instead of stakes at the other end of the board. When the plate worked, the enraged reptiles bit everyone who came across them. In addition to the direct danger of dying from snake venom, such traps had a tremendous psychological effect, since snakes for many were even more dangerous to the casual eye than mines and tripwires. Mincer. The name speaks for itself. It was considered the most terrible and barbaric trap. The soldier fell into a covered-up pit, studded with stakes and hooks all over the surface. Under its own weight, the victim sank lower and lower, gradually turning into a bleeding sifter. This trap undeniably did not give any chance of survival. The one who fell into it died in heinous agony. Flying traps and strange traps. Some of them have already been previously touched upon, but in fact there were a huge number of modifications of such traps. Almost any tree branch or bamboo could have either a venomous snake, a small mine, or explosives attached to it. So there were simply an astonishing number of traps in addition to the stakes. In particular, hollow bamboo sticks, in which gunpowder and explosives were poured, were used as unexpected mines. The Vietnamese installed them all over the place, starting from graves and pumping trees, paths, and so on. During detonation, such mines exploded, hitting several people at once. There is a known case when, in order to enhance the damaging effect, such bamboos were additionally equipped with a mixture of diesel fuel and ammonia. So, from just one such mine, at least 5 Marines were simultaneously killed. 12 more were injured of varying degrees of intensity. The same out-of-the-ordinary traps include so-called pineapples, suspended from tree branches and carefully hidden landmines, grenades, and other types of mines. In addition to this list, you can add a huge number of pointed bamboo stakes, which were installed everywhere. Any careless movement could lead to the fact that the soldier ran into shrouded pointed bamboo. Moreover, such stakes were placed even underwater, which was mostly muddy, so it was simply physically impossible to detect a trap beforehand. Mutual bow. The trap got its name from the fact that both the gun itself and the victim, as it were, bowed to each other. A pointed metal pin was inserted into the bamboo. Then, with the help of rubber equipment, the gun was connected to the wooden board, which was also a starting device. As soon as the soldier stepped on the board or pushed the tripwire, the arrow flew out. The bamboo seemed to bow, and in response, the victim bowed, who received a pin in the chest or stomach. Tiger traps. It was a decently immense system, stuffed with pointed stakes. The trap was located in the crowns of trees, activated either by stretching or by means of a trigger. When the soldier touched the stretched wire, the box fell down sharply, penetrating the victim with stakes. And here it's mandatory to add once again that, as a common practice, the Vietnamese necessarily lubricated all the pointed ends with either feces or corpse poison. So just the defeat itself was almost always fraught with blood poisoning, or in many cases, gangrene, which could, at best, result in amputation. Mixed traps. This was used by the Vietnamese to simply underline the damaging effect. In order to extract the victim, it was necessary to dig the trap itself, or with the help of several fellow soldiers, to try to get the unfortunate wounded or dead. But the very meaning of the extraction assumes that everyone will crowd around. Thus, taking it into account, the Vietnamese often planted one or more hidden mines or installed landmines around the perimeter of the traps, which led to further casualties. As one of the veterans of that war recollected, when one of their soldiers fell into a trap, others rushed to pull him out. They had to pull out the entire trap to extract the stake from the leg. All the while, he kept screaming. Therefore, we often combine different types of traps, and you could stumble upon a mine near the punji. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and see you next time.